Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm your host, Amanda Lamb. In today's deep dive conversation with my friend, fellow journalist, and author Sharon O'Donnell, we're talking about a very emotional and difficult topic. Sharon lost her husband, Kevin, to suicide in April. She spoke with me in May, just a few weeks after his death. And she has a lot of thoughts about how emergency rooms can better care for adults in crisis and how there needs to be more research done on the brains of people who are suffering from deep depression. Sharon, I know this is a tough conversation to have, but to be clear, you reached out to us because you have some really strong feelings about how our healthcare system is failing people who are in crisis, in mental health crises, and thinking about taking their own lives. So first, let's talk about Kevin, your husband of almost 35 years. He died by suicide in April, on April 20th of this year. Tell me about Kevin.
Well, thank you for talking with me today, Amanda. With May being Mental Health Month, I felt compelled to go ahead and talk about this, even though it's still very fresh, only 3 weeks ago. Kevin was a wonderful husband and father, and we were married, as you said, for almost 35 years, and have 3 sons who were the lights of his life. He was a financial analyst in the energy industry, and he owned his own business for most of his career. And with that career, he testified in lots of cases all over the nation, regulation cases and utility cases, but particularly here in North Carolina. And he was known as an expert in his field and highly respected. His main objective, if you knew Kevin, was to be responsible for making sure that his clients were okay. He wanted to keep energy rates fair for his clients. A lot of them were small towns, and he really connected with the people there and took it upon himself to be successful at repping them, at representing them. And although he loved his career, it came with a lot of stress, and that was an issue, but of course there were other stresses in life, and those were issues too. Kevin was also a scout leader in the Boy Scouts for years and played a pivotal role in the lives of so many boys and young men, including our own 3 sons. They were all Eagle Scouts. He was also a volunteer for a dog rescue group. He loved dogs. They were his passion, and he drove dogs to other cities where they would have a new home.
Now, all of these positive things were going on in Kevin's life with his career, his family, his volunteer work, but kind of behind the scenes, he was experiencing and had experienced mental health issues for a very long time and was in treatment. Talk to me about what he had experienced and the treatment that he got most recently.
Okay, well, unfortunately, Kevin struggled with anxiety, severe anxiety for decades. I mean, since we were married, since before we were married, sometimes severe. It was an up and down roller coaster kind of thing, but medications and exercise helped to get him through that. Of course, there were ups and downs during those years, but he and we, myself and the boys, we were familiar with it. We kind of knew what to expect, but it still wasn't easy to live with. But he attained a great level of success in his career, and we had lots of great, happy times as a family, wonderful trips, sporting events, important milestones together, and he was able to enjoy a full, active life despite those battles with anxiety. But in late December of last year, of 2022, just about 4 months ago, he had some stress at work, and part of anxiety is that irrational thoughts come, and they are very hard to fight off. And his mind would take small problems and blew them up into big problems that really didn't exist. And for those of us who have never had severe anxiety, it's hard to understand, and it can be extremely frustrating. I know it was for me, to see how emotions can get out of hand quickly. And the anxiety made Kevin lose perspective, and no amount of trying to make him see the other side or the rational side would work. So in December, that happened with the anxiety. But then it turned into this, I don't know what to call it other than it's like a deep sadness that he had never experienced before. It's like this heaviness that just wouldn't lift. And he was diagnosed with MDD, which is major depressive disorder. So it was something that hit him quickly, even though I think it might have been something underlying the anxiety all these years. But this particular time in December, it seemed impossible to shake. No matter what we did to help, no matter how many people told him that his sadness and his fears were irrational, he wouldn't listen. Or rather, he couldn't listen. It was not within him to process that. The only other treatments he had up to that point, of course, were therapy and definitely the medication. He also looked at exercise as a therapy. Many people that have anxiety and depression, particularly with him and anxiety, he had to be running, backpacking, for 10 days, doing things that were very active, and that was a lot of his therapy too. You could tell a definite difference for the worse if he did not involve himself in those kinds of things.
Sharon, we will talk more after the break about that visit to the emergency room and also about what Sharon sees as a critical component to helping understand death by suicide. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm talking with Sharon O'Donnell, who recently lost her husband, Kevin, to death by suicide. Sharon, if you can give us a brief synopsis of what happened when he did go to the emergency room in February. He was dealing with major depression. He was thinking about death by suicide, and it was not a great experience for you.
Right. Well, I had no problem with the doctors and nurses while Kevin was there. They were great. What I had problems with were more about the facilities and the protocols of the psychiatric ER. Not in the main unit where he got a room 24 hours after his arrival and was able to get care there, but in the ER. The basement of the ER that we were first in was awful. It was all gray and dark and depressing. I mean, when you have someone that's depressed, that's anxious, putting them somewhere like that is counterproductive to what you're trying to do. And I remember we first got in there, my husband just sobbed. It was very prison-like, and that's not the way you want to make your patient feel. So that's my first issue with that. I think we need to make sure that we lighten up and do some renovation or something so that when we have a patient go into an ER that they feel welcomed and not like a prisoner. Someone that's severely depressed is going to feel that way. And then also we had a situation when we went, when we first got to the ER, and they were saying that we could not get a bed in a unit right away. We'd be in the ER for a long time, and they started talking about the possibility of having him transferred to another hospital. And if that occurred, then a sheriff's deputy would have to come to the hospital and put him in handcuffs. And as you can imagine, that made Kevin very upset, made me very upset. I remember Kevin saying, "Boy, you really are my advocate," because I was nice to them, but I was very firm with them. And I said, that makes no sense whatsoever. We're trying to take the stigma away from mental health. And if you're putting handcuffs on a patient that has depression, has no violent tendencies, then we're criminalizing it. So we're taking it another step, and we're trying to we're trying to go the other way. We're not trying to take it the wrong way. And this is definitely going the wrong direction. I mean, we're going back in time, it seems like, we're going to criminalize this by putting handcuffs on them. I realize that there's situations where you have to protect everyone, and someone might have to be in handcuffs, but to make it a blanket statement like that everybody has to be, every psychiatric patient who's transferred has to be in handcuffs, what's wrong with this picture? I just don't get that. And then also, one of the concerns that came to my attention was that when you are in the ER, the particular one that we were in did not have separation for the patients that were depressed and struggling, and have them separated from those patients that had violent tendencies, that were aggressive. They were right beside each other. And we had some situations where the entire hallway was kind of off limits to us, because there was a patient there that was walking up and down, pacing. He was very upset. He was yelling, cussing, screaming, beating the walls, taking a telephone and beating it on the wall right outside our room. He was very aggressive.
So you were afraid?
So we were afraid. And I happened to be there in the early morning hours because I spent the night there in Kevin's hospital room in the ER, and I saw all that. And I'm thinking to myself, there has to be a better way than this. I realize that there might be limitations facility-wise. I realize that there's an overflow in the ER, but this is unacceptable.
So in addition to your concerns about emergency care for people who are having mental health crises, you also, through your research, learned about the Brain Donation Project and the fact that there is a possibility of studying the brain tissue of people with depression and with other neurological disorders. And yet there's not a real clear path to that. There's not a real clear access to that. What did you learn about that, and what would you like to see happen?
Well, I was sleeping one night soon after Kevin passed away, and of course it's hard to get to sleep, but I would often wake up in the middle of the night, and that's what happened. And I just started thinking about brain tissue donation. It just hit me like a ton of bricks, because I just thought of all the things that scientists can learn from Kevin's brain tissue, because he had those issues. He'd had them for a while. I knew the circuitry. I knew the neurons. I knew all those things were miscommunicating. That's what we've been told for all these years. It's simply your brain miscommunicating. It's, you've got serotonin and those issues too, and chemical imbalances, but you also have at the very center of all this is that miscommunication of your cells. That to me says, okay, if you have research about this, then down the road, perhaps we can do something about it and make some discoveries and be able to make even better treatments. So that morning when I woke up, I'm thinking, I want to be able to do that, but I knew it was too late for him to donate his brain tissue. But I started Googling right away on my phone that morning and found a site that actually had brain donations and worked through some very reputable national health organizations. And with that site, I started looking at it. It was a brain donation project, braindonationproject.org, and it had on there a way that people could actually pre-register to donate your brain tissue. It was, of course, for people that struggled with brain issues, with
maybe
mental
dementia.
illnesses, like mental illnesses, but also dementia, Alzheimer's,
Sure.
Parkinson's, anything that's neurological. Just think of all the things that can go wrong with your brain, but it can be researched and we can learn from that. And so I became passionate about looking into that. And when I did, I saw that there are venues, there are ways that you can, there are systems that are set up already for us to use. I just felt like it was a missed opportunity for me because I didn't know about them beforehand. And I really wish that when the first responders come out, when something like this happens, when there's an unexpected death, I really would like to be able to for that information to be included on the literature that's given to you.
To be shared.
Right. So if you have a list of things that they say you need to do, call the funeral home, X, Y, and Z, you're doing these things. And then to also include on that list, consider your loved one's wishes about organ donation for transplant. And then also, lastly, consider brain tissue donation, particularly if your loved one who has passed away struggled with those issues like we just talked about, with those neurological and mental illnesses.
And of course, we will include that information on WRAL.com, as well as resources for people who are struggling with anxiety, depression, thoughts of suicide, resources in your area. Sharon, you're such a strong person. It's hard for me to even understand how you can talk about this right now. So I just want to close by saying, how are you and how is your family? And what's the path for you right now through this?
Well, there are times I might appear strong, but my boys and I, their wives, our whole family has many times where we break down in tears over seemingly small, minute things that hit home with us. We've cried a lot of tears, so much so I remember the guy saying several days afterwards, after it happened, there's no way I can even cry anymore because I'm so exhausted. The crying has exhausted me so much. So, we've had those points too. But then it gets to another sort of plateau where you're like, okay, I'm still going to be grieving, but I need to do something. I'm still going to be processing this for a long time, but I can't do it sitting still. And that's kind of where we all are. My sons all want to get involved. My daughters-in-law are looking into things to get involved. We knew that mental health, of course, we've all been involved to a certain extent in doing some things over the years with mental health, promotion of different organizations. But now, of course, with this, we have so many experiences to share. And that can only make things better when you share those experiences. So even though it might be tough, it's something that I felt like I needed to do, and I know that Kevin will be behind me in doing that. My sons are behind me in doing that. And so basically trying to put one foot in front of the other is still what we're doing. And as I've told my sons, this is something that your dad, this is something that Kevin would want us to do, and he would want us to still celebrate milestones and not feel guilty about them. And he would want us to be able to live and enjoy those lives that he worked so hard to give us.
Sharon, thank you so much
for
sharing your story and this very important issue and creating this awareness.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and making us part of your morning routine. If you like what you're hearing, please rate us on Apple Podcasts or on whatever podcast app you use. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email waiting in your inbox every morning with Triangle news events and headlines to get you ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.